Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you here today. Welcome. I just wanted to say a few words to kick off today's training. First is that Sharon, Sarah, and I want to really applaud you, each of you, for choosing to embark on this learning journey. And I think it will be a journey. We know that this is a big commitment away from your regular duties, priorities, and tasks of the day. But we believe, as I know that you do, by sheer virtue that you chose to sign up for this, that to do the learning, to dig deep, to understand student needs, and developing your capacity as a leader in equity will ultimately help drive changes that will improve our student outcomes. It's just such important work. And our hope is that you'll learn ways to do your work better and to bring what you learn, not keep it to yourself, but bring it back to share with your leadership teams. Your instructor for the next 4 months is Dr. Megan Pollock from Engineering Inclusion. And Megan has been a leader and researcher in this work for 20 years, or maybe a little more, I'm not sure. Megan is an engineer turned educator, creating and delivering professional development, and worked as the director of professional development for the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. You probably know it as NAEP, and created the STEM Careers Toolkit, which some of you might be familiar with. So we're thrilled to be able to bring her expertise to our state. We've been working on that for quite a while, and so I'm so excited for today. I hope that you'll take advantage of all of the different ways that Megan will be available to you through the group meetings, the LMI site, individual coaching, and materials. And I know it'll be fruitful. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan.
Thanks so much, Chris. I am excited to start this. This has certainly been a journey in the making, and I'm really thrilled to be back with Wisconsin folks. So I want to introduce myself just a little bit more. So I am in a much different weather than you all are. I live almost directly south of you in a small rural town called Orange, Texas. I was talking with one of your colleagues last night. He had called to get some help, and I was sort of running back in. I had just gone paddling on my backyard lake, and he's like, "Where are you?" I was like, "Not in Wisconsin." I'm sure your lakes are all frozen over. And so this place where I live is important to me because it's where I was raised, and I just recently moved back. And it is a really small rural town. And one of the things that I think has been really valuable for me moving back is that, one, certainly connecting to my roots, but this is a deeply conservative part of the state, of the country. And so it allows me as a practitioner within diversity, equity, and inclusion to have some maintained visibility into the challenges that people who are still have opportunities to develop their social consciousness. And so I hope that that is going to be valuable to you all in your work as well. And so, as Chris said, I'm an engineer turned educator. I used to work for Texas Instruments and switched from widgets to workshops over a decade ago, and just really haven't looked back. And so you'll get to know me more over the next few months, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that because we have lots of ways for us to connect. I also want to introduce you to my colleague, Casey. She's here with us today, and she's going to be helping really behind the scenes manage the Zoom technicalities, and so that I can join some of you in your breakout rooms. If you have any issues, you can reach out to her, and she'll be able to help you. And she is also based here in the South in New Orleans. Casey, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone. Like Megan said, I'm here in New Orleans. And yeah, let me know if you have any technical questions or otherwise. Otherwise, I'm happy to be learning right along with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Casey. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to do today. Our agenda is when I run virtual sessions, I like to run things in like 50-minute segments. So we'll work from 9 to 9:50 today, take a 10-minute break. We'll do the same thing for the second hour. And then the third hour, we're going to run the full 60 minutes and talking about a variety of things. This first hour, we're going to be talking about really an introduction to the program, an overview. You're going to have lots of time to talk and to share, and we'll do some breakout rooms as well. For the second hour, we're going to be really setting the stage. We're going to be talking about systems and how that is really critical to our work, and making sure that we're having that visibility into not just looking at individual problems, but we're looking at how the system creates some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And then we are going to spend the last hour talking about and looking at our data. And so if you have any questions on this, let me know, but this is the general flow of what we're going to have today. Now, all of us are probably pros at Zoom by now, but just in case, I want to let you know that all of you have control of your audio. And so you can unmute and talk at any time. This is a very communal learning opportunity, and so we hope that you will do so. You also have access to the closed captioning. We can turn that on, or you can turn that on and manage the visibility that you see. I love to see your faces, and I hope that you'll be willing to do that with us today. However, I also fully recognize that sometimes you just don't want to be seen, and that's fine, right? So if you need to turn your camera off to just manage something, we'll understand. You also have the use of the reactions. I encourage you to liberally use those. You can also use the chat. At times throughout the program, we'll also use some Slido polling. I don't have a lot of that set up today, but it is a tool that I like to use. We'll be doing breakout rooms, and so you'll have time to talk with colleagues and get to know other people if you don't know each other. This is also a really good time to just check in and make sure that your name shows how you want us to address you. You can also add your pronouns if you'd like, but I know sometimes if we maybe clicked a link that somebody sent us, it's their name, so just make sure that it's your name showing, so that that's how you'd like for us to call you. Now, it doesn't matter how many degrees in engineering I have, there's actually very little I can do to help you if you have issues. And so if all else fails, just like reset back out and reboot, and come back in, and usually Zoom is pretty steady, and it'll help you get settled there. Now, because there is a good chunk of us, we're not going to do around the room introductions, but I do want to give you a chance in small groups to talk to each other. And so in your breakouts, we're going to set you up in some breakouts with 4 people per room. So Casey, if you can help me get that set up. And in the breakouts, I want you to just tell people who you are, your name, your role, where you're located in the state, and describe why you chose to participate in this program. We're going to talk about your specific goals later, so you don't have to go into great detail there unless you just really want to. But we want to just kind of give you a chance to start building some connection and community with a few other people here today. Welcome back.
Welcome back. All right, we should all be here now.
Okay. All right, so I hope that you were able to meet some new people, maybe learn something new about somebody else. And I hope that you've also been able to plug into the network, to the learning management system, and add your introductions there, because that's also a way that we're going to be able to kind of document things, and you can learn about everyone else in the group as well. So I want to go over a few logistics for the program, and kind of help you understand what to expect from me, what to expect from the learning plan that we have, and some reminders as well. So first of all, I want to remind you that all of the communications and events from here on out are going to be run through the learning management system. And that's just to kind of help us get out of email, so that you can always come log in to check on things. If you haven't already, you can download the app on your phone. You can manage your notifications. You can also get our tablet apps if you want to access it from your iPad or whatever device that you use. And so, make sure that you do that, so that you're really engaged in the community that we're building, the learning community that we're building here. As Chris said, you have the opportunity to connect with me for coaching, for support. And on the LMS, there are all of my resources for how you can connect with me. I want to also invite you to check the cohort list on the platform and ask who's missing today, and if you know them, would you reach out to them? So we've discovered that there are some spam filters that are catching everything I'm sending to them, and so we want to make sure that they're going to get connected, because if I contact them, it's just going to go back to their spam filter. So we need your help to reach out to them. So I also want to invite you to also look at this sort of ground rules, shared agreements that I have on the LMS as well, to kind of help us figure out how we're going to engage throughout the program. And so on the LMS, I talk through each of these, and this will really be an anchor to all the ways that we approach our work. We want to do whatever we can to stay engaged. I don't know about you, but sometimes I am a terrible workshop participant because I'm too distracted by many other things. And so, help yourself be successful by reducing the distractions that you're facing. And this also means that we're going to actively and empathically listen to others when they're talking, and really trust that they're going to do the same for us. Another thing here for me as a facilitator that's really hard is to resist overloading and rushing our agenda. Even though I've been teaching professionally in a professional development setting for over a decade, I still have a tendency to think I can do too many things in too short of time. And so you are 100% welcome to say, Megan, slow down, you're going too fast. And then I want to make sure that I'm giving you the space that you need to learn. So the second is to share the mic. So it's so important that we recognize that everyone's voice matters, and we want to make sure that we're making space and inviting all of those voices to contribute. So especially when you're in breakout rooms, it's important for you to make sure that you're asking people to say, hey, Kristen, what do you think? Gabrielle, what do you think? So even if people aren't sharing, it doesn't mean that they aren't thinking something really amazing. Sometimes I find that the quiet people are the ones that have some of the most brilliant, thoughtful reflections. So we want to make sure that we're bringing them into the conversation. And I'm really depending on you to help me do that. The next is to support others. And so we want to make sure that we're navigating this content with patience, kindness, and respect. When you don't understand something, ask. I want to help clarify things. If I don't have an answer, then I will find one for you. This also means that in order for us to support each other, we need to reject stereotypes, prejudice, biases, and really focus on unfiltered evidence. As an example, have you all ever said something and you're like, what am I saying? And you're trying to pull words back in your mouth. This is what I was telling Casey when y'all went into the breakout room. I was like, why did I just say all of that stuff about my hometown? That was weird. And so if that was weird to you, it was weird to me. And so I think I had stereotypes loaded in what I was saying. And so the reality is that all of us are human, and that we're all accessing weird things in our brain, and we say things. And so we want to really create space to be authentic and transparent about the way that we communicate. And then finally, in supporting others, we want to call people in instead of calling them out when reminders are needed. Because if we call people out, we're pushing them back to the margins. And so we want to, in a way, the best way that we can, invite them to join us on a journey of whatever awareness, so that we can help each other grow. And then the final thing here is to stretch and reflect. So all of us are accountable for our words and our actions. I am, you are, each and every one of us. And as a process of that is there's a growth mindset that I want to invite you and all of us to have in here, that I believe that with effort we can improve. I believe that when we're practicing and we have an intentional desire to create meaningful kinds of change, we can do that. And so I hope that you accept this challenge for all of us to stretch ourselves and grow and learn some new things together. And then finally, and this is something that we're going to spend time today on, is that in order for us to do this work, we have to take time to acknowledge our individual and our collective identities, and reflect on what we've done, what we've learned, and celebrate the successes too. So the challenges that you all are facing within career and technical education and trying to improve the numbers, whatever those numbers might be, it is hard. And so we need to find ways to celebrate along the way. And so I invite you to keep this in mind. We'll revisit this throughout the time together, but I hope that you'll use this as a shared language when you are working in your small groups and when you're discussing on the learning management system. So the next reminder is to invite you to download my contact information. And so you can, if you haven't already, you can download or add my contact. I'm trying to drop a link into the chat. There you go. So if you go to my website there's a blue button and it downloads a contact card. And so you can just add me right to your contacts there. And so that has my phone number and my email address. And so, if you have any issues, you can contact me. You can always contact me through the learning management system too. There's a chat feature there. And so I will always do my best to get back to you. But don't hesitate to contact me as well. I am an elder millennial, so I do respond to text messages sometimes faster than I can to phone messages if I'm teaching or something like that. Okay, so now let's talk about what to expect on the learning management system. So every week, I'm going to drop content on Mondays. It could be at a different time on Monday, but usually Mondays, you're going to have lots of other work responsibilities. So at some point during the day on Monday, the content's going to drop. I also am going to be using keywords, symbols, and time estimates to really help you quickly navigate through the platform. So for example, when you look, let me X out of this. When you look at the platform, and mine looks a little bit different than yours because I'm the instructor here, but you'll see that I'm trying to put time limits. So this will really help you plan whatever time that you have available. If there's a green dot next to it, that means that it includes one of the key takeaways from the program. And when you see this little yellow emergency sign, that means that the time is going to be really dependent on what you have available to you, right? So for the disaggregated data analysis, that's going to be super dependent on how ready your data is to do the project. And so again, hopefully this helps you. I use these keywords to kind of help you realize what it is that I'm going to be asking you to do within each of those. And I'm also super open to feedback. If you have other requests that are going to help you better navigate this, then that will be really helpful. Just so you know, from my end, I do have the ability to see progress. And so this helps me know, so some people had 100%, but then I added the new content this week. So Leah, for example, had 100% complete last night until I added the new content for this week. So yay, Leah, and Chris as well. And so I think some other people, but I think Leah was the first. And so just that helps me kind of know who's making some progress and then maybe how I can help, connect some people who might be needing a little bit more help. All right. And so on the LMS, you've got the syllabus that's going to be here. If you're ever looking for the overview of the curriculum, it is embedded here in the overview. So you've got the full program syllabus there. The feed, what that is just the general comments that are being shared. You all have the ability to comment here as well. And so you can share comments, you can share resources, something like whatever it is that you want to share. And so I hope that you will use that to actively engage in the community. The cohort list is here, is what I just had, what I was just showing you. And then the chat here, this is a group chat. So this is for all of us. And so if you chat here, you're going to be chatting with everyone in this cohort. And so sometimes there might be questions that you want to share in that kind of way as well. Now, this learning management system hosts several other programs. And so you might see some other content that's here. You're invited to access it. For example, the reading community here under learning community, you're welcome to join this. It's free. And we have our very first discussion on Wednesday on the book Against Civility, The Hidden Racism and Our Obsession with Civility. You don't have to have read the book or listen to it. You can just show up and talk with us. And so you can see that the event for that is here under events. And so check that out if you're interested. And then also this is a broader network, so I may share information at times. Okay, so let's go back. Now, how to get the most out of this program. This program is meant to be community focused, and that means discussion and engagement is really key. All of you bring tremendous value and expertise, and we want to make sure that you are offering that, right? You are all experts in your own field, and we hope that you'll bring that to contribute to all of our learning in this time together. Next is I need you to let me know what you need. I want you to ask questions and give feedback. This program, it's not a passive curriculum. So even though I have a syllabus and an agenda, my goal is to serve your needs. And as much as I want to, I can't read minds yet. So I can't know what you need until you tell me. And so if you give me feedback, and then on the LMS, you'll see, on the LMS, there is a way for you to give feedback anonymously. You can always text, message, email, whatever. But that feedback is really important because it helps me, again, customize this program. I noticed that in some of the pre-work, there were some comments of like, some curiosity of like how this program is going to be able to help people from so many different aspects and so many different areas. And while I don't know all things, I do know a lot of things. And if you let me know, again, what it is that you need, I'm going to do my best to serve you in that. And so again, if there's something that you need that is particularly unique, that might be something that's really good for us to do in a one-on-one setting or with your team. Another tool for being successful in this program is I recommend blocking time out on your calendar to invest in this program each week. So, whatever day is going to look better for you, try to block out an hour, 2 hours to think about the ideas and to work on your efforts. Another key thing is to share ideas and resources. So we want to make sure that you're bringing all of those brilliant tools and resources to the community as well. All right, so we're getting ready for another discussion. We're going to be talking about goals here, but one of the things that I always love sort of anchoring our conversations in is a theory that was popularized by Stephen Covey. And so Stephen Covey, popularized the spheres of influence, although it actually comes from like ancient Greek Stoic philosophy, which probably has roots in indigenous history as well. But what he popularized in his work is to really think about these three and the middle three concentric circles of one, recognizing what is it that we can control and what is it that we can influence. We can acknowledge those things that we care about, those things that we're concerned about, but we're never going to make progress if we get stuck there. So in whatever your role and whatever your capacity, you're going to have different level of control and influence on different things. And so I want to make sure that, if you find yourself sort of floating out into this sort of circle of concern, how do you reel yourself back in? Now, I have a fourth circle here, and that is the circle of will. Now, where we also make the most progress is where we figure out what is it that we care the most about, that we're most interested in, and how does that then intersect with our influence and control? Because where we have the greatest interest and passion, when we combine that with what we can actually control and influence, that's where we're really going to find our sweet spot for the change that we can make. Now, we're going to put you back into breakout rooms for another discussion, but I want you to first take a few minutes to write and reflect on your goals for the program. And I want you to share this on the Mighty Network for posterity as well. And then after a few minutes, we're going to put you in small groups. So I want you to think about the following prompts. What are your intentions for how you want to engage in this community and program? And what I mean by that is, do you want to, what's the level of investment that you are able to invest in this? Because what I don't want this program to be is something that's so deeply overwhelming that you quit, right? If you get behind in content, just keep moving along, right? I'll let you know if you can kind of skip forward to things. But sometimes we have to sort of set intentions of like, okay, I'm going to give myself grace when I'm behind, because we know it happens, right? Set intention for, how often you want to check in, whether you want to use your mobile devices. I want you to also think about, what is it specifically that you want to learn? What is it that you want to learn from each other? What is it that you are interested in learning from me? And then, are there any specific goals that you're working towards? So if you're approaching this and you already have decided, my goal is to increase the number of women in engineering within my region, that's great. That's super specific. We can start working towards that. If you're not sure yet, that's okay. We're going to use a data exercise to help us dig into that. So I'm going to set a timer and put it on the screen. I want you to just think for a few minutes some of your questions to this, and then we're going to put you in groups and we're going to put you in pairs to discuss this. So in just a second, Casey's going to open the rooms for us. And what I want you to do in your pairs is to discuss some of the things that you're thinking about. Now, I don't expect you to have a full-on game plan at this moment about what it is that you want to do and accomplish. I just want you to be thinking about some general ideas. So if you, for example, I had a private message about, if you're learning to serve many districts, your goals might be different, right? Your goals might be about creating some kind of template they suggested. And that sounds like a great idea. You know your role and your goals best. And so we really just want to start scratching, out, listing some goals of potential things that we could accomplish as a result of this program. And then I'll work with you to really hone in those ideas for your projects. Now, if you get into a breakout room that somebody isn't in a space where they can talk to you, pop out. So come back to the main room, and then we'll put you into another chat, because sometimes that happens. And so we want to make sure that you're able to chat in an active way that supports your needs. Okay, so you've got 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and debrief, and then we'll have our first break. All right, here we go, Casey.
Right.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, welcome back. So I want to give us a little bit of time to debrief this before we go into our break. And so I want to invite anyone to share something that came up for you in your individual reflections, something that came up for you in your conversations. What's something that you talked about? Maybe something you want to learn, maybe some specific goals that you're excited about, or some intentions that you're setting for yourself that you want to share.
I can jump in. We actually talked about the Perkins indicator quite a bit of non-traditional, obviously learning strategies on how to improve that, but also, some of the data points that we look at and how to mine that data, but then using the data to inform decisions that we're making within the schools for our students and staff. I think that's our ultimate goal, is obviously to see that number continue to go up.
Great, thanks, Alex. Amanda, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I can share. So one of the pieces that we talked about too is, obviously, as we're looking to increase NTO participation and looking at the data, a lot of us now have a pretty good handle on how to find the data, but it's the conversations that surround that data that I'm just really looking to be intentional about finding some best practice on what those conversations look like.
Great, thanks, Amanda. What else?
I can share. I think one of my goals for us as a district is to kind of either have me be guided to that next step of what are some strategies above and beyond the traditional strategies that we've engaged with NTO populations over time. I know that there's probably not a cut and dry answer to that, but just that overall increase in knowledge of, okay, we've tried these, what's next? Kind of that, how do we keep doing it?
Yeah, so thanks, Erin. One of the things that I've learned in doing this kind of work with states and schools and institutions over the last decade is I've never met anybody who's like not trying something, right? Everybody's trying something, but it usually feels like the old, throwing spaghetti at a wall saying, like we're just like throwing spaghetti at a wall, trying to see what sticks. And what this process that we're going to be learning and doing together helps us to kind of stop that, right? So it teaches us, how do we look at our data? How do we use that data to drive some decisions? And then how do we do some root cause analyses that help us understand what's actually happening in our regions? Because what we don't have is a dearth of understanding of the root causes. We know all the root causes. What your challenge is to figure out what are the root causes that are at play within your specific environment. And then how do we design a targeted strategic intervention that's going to address that root cause, right? Like for example, one of my favorite stories to tell is a school that we worked with through NAEP, when we worked with them in Oregon. And so they were like, we think that students need more mentors. We think that students need all of these things. And then when they actually went and asked the students, what they learned is that the students, the girls in welding, they didn't want to come because they had heard that they would get burned because the uniforms were too big. So what they did is they spent $400, bought some smalls and extra small uniforms, and then did a little bit of a marketing campaign, and they increased their numbers by 20. That is remarkable, right? Usually we're looking for like really small numbers, but sometimes the data, it gives us an opportunity to go ask a question, and we go ask the students, hey, why aren't you coming? We can create all of these like high resource interventions, mentoring, manufacturing days, all of these things, but all they really need to do is spend $400 on some smalls and extra smalls and then market it, right? And so that's the kind of solutions that we want to help you begin to think about is, what is the data telling us, where are the gaps, and then how do we go learn to ask the right questions that are going to help us really understand the issue, and then we can address that. All right, so we are at our promised break, and I try to hold fast to those so that if you need to check in on kids, on email, whatever, you can do that. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. I'll set a timer on the screen. I'll play some music, but you can mute the screen if you don't want to hear it, and we'll see you back at the hour. Thanks, y'all. Now, how many of you enjoy baking, or maybe you try to bake but haven't found the joy of it yet? We got some hands, a few hands. Awesome. Now, baking is typically very precise, which is one of the reasons why it's not my favorite thing, because I like to be very spontaneous when I'm cooking. But baking requires very specific measurements. And typically, like, what you input to the recipe is what you get out of it, right? So if you replace an ingredient or you don't put enough, it's going to affect the output of whatever, confection or whatever that you're making. Same thing when we think about like if you use a 3D printer. So whatever you program that printer to do is what it's going to output. And so for what we're going to be talking about over the next few minutes is, I want us to make sure that we're thinking about the systemic ways and the systemic reasons and the systemic barriers that are driving the outputs that we see. Because what we know to be 100% true is that systems are designed to get the results that they get. So if we're getting the results of low non-traditional occupation, students and low numbers in these pathways, it is a function of the output of a system, a very big complex system. And so if we want to begin to see some of those changes, we have to change the system. And so one of the tools that I've created is a little acronym that's going to really frame our conversation, and that is to drive. So if we recognize that input drives output, so the input of all of the things in the environment drives the output. If we want to drive change, then we need to focus on these 5 things. So we need to understand our data, and that's what we're going to be spending some time doing today and over the next couple of weeks. The next thing that we have to really understand are those root causes. And so that's what I was saying in response to Erin's comment earlier, is that we have to understand exactly what's at play with our specific audiences. Then we design an intervention, and the intervention that we design is going to be something that's specifically targeted to address the root causes that we identify. And then from there, we verify the degree to which the program, the intervention that we've created, is meeting that need. And then finally, we need to evaluate the success of that. An evaluation is something that we can do throughout the whole process, and we should always be doing through the whole process. And so I will add this as a resource to the network later. But again, if we are going to drive change, we need to use this iterative, ongoing, looping back and forth process, looking at data, root causes, targeted interventions, verification of the ways in which those interventions address those root causes, and then evaluating the success of those programs. Most importantly, what we want to focus on is recognizing that people are not broken. We aren't broken. Our students aren't broken. People aren't broken, and they don't need to be fixed. But we can focus on changing systems rather than people. And what that means is we have to figure out what are the barriers and remove them. And then what are the supports that students need? And then we can add those. This is by definition educational equity. So the removing of barriers and the adding of supports to level the playing field for students from marginalized, traditionally marginalized and excluded populations. Now, again, connecting here with systems, systemic cultural forces create and sustain institutional biases. Now, we're going to dive deeper into some of these concepts as we go throughout the program, but what's important for us to recognize is there are cultural forces at play in Wisconsin. There are cultural forces at play within your community, and those cultural forces, some of them are visible, some of them we see. And the image of the iceberg was published by Hall in the 70s, and it's been largely popularized within the sort of ethos of this work. But what we know is that we can see things that are happening, right? We can see the culture when we walk into a room. We can, if we walk into an automotive lab, if we see what we feel and experience in that space can be a visible culture. But then there's also this invisible culture. I was working with a client last week in Colorado, and some of the faculty, the professors, came up to me afterwards, and they wanted me to know, or they were asking for support, and they were saying that they were experiencing some really unfortunate exclusionary practices by their colleagues within the automotive group. And they were saying that how invisible it is to everyone else, but how deeply painful and traumatic and insidious it is to them, right? And so when we think about culture, some of the painful things that people are experiencing, some of the things that we don't understand, we may not see them, but they could certainly be happening to other people. And so at the bottom of this iceberg are the deeply hidden, unconscious kinds of our culture, kinds of our biases and prejudices and discriminations that manifest in ways we don't see. And so these cultural forces then create organizational forces. And what we're talking about in some of the results that we're seeing within our institutions and organizations is that those organizational forces produce the outcomes. So if we go back to the top of that green box, the symptoms that we're seeing are lack of participation, lack of completion, lack of concentration. Those are symptoms, and they are a result of all of these things that are driving it. And so those organizational forces are a function of the structures, the rules and the policies in the place. Those lead to the pattern of behavior and the practices and the norms within those environments. So when the person told me last week that they experienced a male colleague saying, I can't even repeat what they said, just the most egregious and gross, terribly ugly things to them. If that's happening between professional colleagues, I cannot imagine how that is manifesting in the classroom and with the students, right? So that becomes a pattern of acceptable behavior and practices that has disempowered these women to speak up to the challenges that they're facing, right? And then they wonder why they don't have more young women in automotive, right? Because the women who do teach there are so bad, you know, just battered by the trauma that their colleagues are putting on them. And again, it's not, it took a lot of courage for those women to reveal to me what was happening, but they were really seeking help. And I think that so often we don't see these kinds of things. And so again, I want you to keep in mind this sort of flow of how things begin to shift. Now, we've put some thought into this and recognize that it can also go the other way, right? So as an example, COVID is a sort of an event that happened, and it has changed our practices of behavior. It's changed some structures and policies, and then it created its own cultural forces. So it can go both ways. Now, I want to introduce one more model of thinking to you for you, and then we're going to put you back into breakout rooms to begin thinking about this. Now, the force field analysis, it was created by Kurt Lewin in the 40s, and he used it in his work as a social psychologist. So, but however, today it's really used a lot in business for making communications, a lot of communications or no, you know, go or no go kind of decisions. And so the idea behind a force field analysis is that situations are maintained by an equilibrium between forces that drive change and others that resist change. So you've got tailwinds that are driving change, and you've got headwinds that are resisting change. And so for change to happen, the driving forces must be strengthened. So the tailwinds must be strengthened, and the resisting forces weakened. And so tailwinds are forces for change, and headwinds are forces resisting change. What I want to give you an opportunity to talk about, and Casey, you can set up some small groups of about three or four people in this. I want you to think of a change that you want to make within your sphere of influence. What is it and why? So just think of change. What are some of the headwinds? Those are the forces resisting change, and the tailwinds, forces for change. So if you need another way of looking at this, if you have ever cycled, right? So, you know, you want to cycle, it's easier to cycle when the tailwinds are pushing you, right? So if you're about to go on a long bike ride, you want to make sure that you're not putting the headwinds on your return home. It's going to make it really hard to get home if you've already burned all your energy on a long ride, right? So think about what are some of those headwinds that you're facing and tailwinds related to that specific change. Now, it's important that we think here, though we know that people can be barriers, challenge yourself to focus on systems, policies, and norms. All right, so we're going to give you about 7 minutes for this conversation, and we're talking about headwinds and tailwinds that are going to be supports for your change or barriers for your change. All right, thanks, Casey.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. All right. Let's debrief just a little bit. And so let's hear from someone that we haven't heard from yet to debrief and share some of the things that you talked about in your small groups. So what were some of the headwinds and tailwinds that you recognized in your reflections and discussions?
I guess I can start. So this is a really, in my mind, not a major big issue, but whereas some of the data we just been looking at recently. So at our junior high level, we call some of our classes, because they're more generalized, like manufacturing. So junior high manufacturing. But at the high school level, then they become a little bit more specific, such as welding or intro to welding, advanced welding, and machining and things like that. We don't have very many sections of manufacturing ever running at that junior high level, but we have a ton, and usually overloaded sections up at the high school by getting a little bit more specific with the naming. I guess in terms of maybe a headwind, our manufacturing partners want us to reshape what the term manufacturing means. but it already is so embedded with negative connotations that I think we maybe are hurting ourselves just by calling the class manufacturing. So it's something pretty simplistic, but if we call it just something a little bit different, we can still arrive at the same content and some of the same learning outcomes, but maybe just avoid that name. So pretty simplistic, but something that I think we have the sphere of influence over.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Aaron. I had this exact conversation with a client yesterday in Alabama. So he's trying to start a manufacturing program, but nobody's signing up. And so he's thinking, what else can we call it? So he's facing that, they're facing that same challenge. So a headwind is a force resisting change, is just the sort of stereotypes and public understanding about what manufacturing is. I'm trying to steal what this guy says. He called it dark, dingy, and dank or something like that. I don't know. Like he had 3 Ds to describe manufacturing.
It's dark, dirty, and dangerous.
Okay, thank you. All right. Which is so interesting because for me as a semiconductor engineer, my perspective of manufacturing is very clean and bright, right? It's like super clean. But that depends on your version of manufacturing. If you live, in an area that's mostly, automotive, it's mostly automotive or otherwise, right? So thanks, Aaron. What else came up for you?
In our group, we had a conversation about my experiences with particularly Spanish-speaking families and how to get them more involved, not only in CTE programming, but work-based learning programming. And noticing there is a gap between that, there's a huge language barrier. And I guess a headwind would be personnel. Finding teachers, finding translators, and I don't know if I guess I'm struggling if that's a headwind because it's an obvious need that needs to be filled, and I don't know why it's not happening. So maybe there's some more hidden reasons why that's not happening. But we all, as educators in at least in my building, and I know from other educators I've spoken to, are really trying to support those students. It's just something that I've noticed is a challenge. So students getting access to this programming and helping them understand when they have a language barrier, and then in our population, typically it's Spanish speakers.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so certainly resources around people, these can become huge barriers. And that's where we have to figure out sometimes how do we get creative. The Google Translate is super good now, right? So you can have it translate your copy, and you could then work with the Spanish class as part of their activities to help polish that language if need be. So like sometimes we have to kind of get creative if we can't hire new staff that can do that. But one of the things that you're also talking about is it's not just language. Like that is certainly a tremendous barrier, but particularly some of the research that we know, and we have to be very careful not to stereotype in how we describe things like this. But when we talk about work-based learning and some of the challenges that might be for different students and sort of getting there, there can be lots of cultural differences and nuances that we need to understand and then figure out how to address as well. And so it's a barrier might be language, a barrier might be the sort of access to those things and the sort of cultural expectations of who gets to do those kinds of pathways. So those are things that we need to look at. What else came up for you? Thanks, Sarah.
I just talked about how frequently the conversation is that by the time students are getting to middle school and high school, which is where they first get true interaction with, CTE curriculum, they already have perceptions of and misconceptions of what they can and can't do. But when I go and visit elementary schools, there's not explicit instruction curriculum. There's not even implicit things on walls in most cases that would suggest students can or cannot do these things. And you don't hear it coming in conversation with students. And even when you do, most of the time there's an instructional coach or a principal that's pretty good about addressing that. So then the question is, okay, well, Where are they running into these things outside of school? And if they are, it's under the guidance of their parents. And then it becomes this kind of question of, okay, well, if their parents are guiding them in these conversations, then what is our role in having that conversation to potentially, shift the mindset of, that cultural belief or that family tradition or whatever that might be happening at home. So I think there's there's a little bit of dissonance sometimes for me. It's like, okay, I know that if there's something that's being explicitly done in a school setting, that needs to be addressed, and we need to talk about that. And that is our, that is something that we need to do professionally. But culturally, outside of school, if there's these beliefs, then who are we to address that? Is it our role?
Yeah, so what you're bringing up is that there are certainly lots of influences on students' beliefs about careers. So my grandma, she passed away about a year ago, but she maintained for years that women should not be engineers. And this was an influence in my life, right? Like, don't be an engineer. And that she thought if I became an engineer, I'd become like, I don't know what I would become. She also thought when I moved to Purdue to go get my doctorate that she had lots of opinions about moving to Yankee country, right? So like she holds lots of stereotypes. She was terrified of what I might become if I come live with you Northerners, right? But these ideas, these deeply rooted cultural stereotypes and beliefs about things, I love my grandma, but I disagreed with those worldviews, right? And I disagree with them certainly now, right? But as a kid, I needed someone else to counter those messages. I needed someone else to tell me, hey, you can go and do and be whatever it is that you want to be, which is certainly lots of messages that my parents gave to me. But what you mentioned a few times is those explicit messages. But what we also know is there are lots and lots of implicit messages that are sent. And so, for example, girls make the decision, it keeps getting younger, by the way, by 3rd and 4th grade, they make a decision whether or not they're a math person. They still have the same math and science grades. They go on to take the same amount of math and science classes and have the math and science GPAs, but they think they're not a math person, and that begins in 3rd and 4th grade. That is due to deeply implicit messages that happen in the classroom, that happen at home. And that is certainly a tremendous influence when we look at the trajectory of females going into non-traditional STEM pathways. And so these implicit messages are something that we need to be thinking about as well. In tandem to what you're saying is that I encourage us to always come back to that sphere of influence. What can we influence and what can we control? It's unlikely that we're going to be able to go to Hollywood and change the way that engineers are perpetuated in the television shows, right? If you have influence, let's talk, because I want to learn more, right? But many of us probably don't. But we do have opportunities to influence in many kinds of ways. And I don't think that we need to be afraid of conquering deeply rooted cultural stereotypes about any kind of profession, gendered, racial, socioeconomic, or otherwise, right? I believe that that's our job as educators, is to help students see the full spectrum of possibilities that are open to them, and give them the opportunity to choose. And so if a parent then wants to come and say, don't tell my daughter she can be an engineer, then we can talk about that later. But I doubt that that's going to happen, right? Now, I actually have heard some stories about parents coming, specifically around manufacturing, coming and saying, I don't want my daughter working in manufacturing. And then they insert lots of reasons why. And then you have an opportunity to dispel some stereotypes with them as well.
Yeah, no, we have some great stories of actually inviting them to come and visit, do a site visit of a youth apprenticeship site or something of that nature, and completely changing their belief systems about what that career field looks like or the opportunities that are there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good. All right, so I want to encourage you to keep this force field analysis in mind and recognize that we're dealing with this equilibrium, that we've got things that are supporting us and then we've got things that are resisting that change, and we have to keep these in mind as we advance in our work. So for the rest of the program, we're going to be learning about some we're going to dig deeper into these concepts. If I can get my slides to advance. Oops, now they just went too fast. But I want to introduce this, and you'll learn more about this in the coming weeks. But one of the models that we're going to look at and learn in our time together is looking at what are the barriers and root causes to access and success in CTE. We're going to learn the 4I model of oppression. And these are the barriers, and this creates a system of advantage and disadvantage. So it helps some students and it disadvantages other students. And so again, we're going to dive deeper into this as we go along, but this is helping us to develop that true systemic understanding of all of the things at play. And when we begin to look at and understand how all of these things work together, then we must and we can begin to address all of the barriers that students are facing at them. We'll also be looking at some of the root causes, and my work has been able to delineate the ways in which the root causes that we know to be true for participation and completion and concentration within CTE, I've been able to break them down by the 4 I's. And so this is a bit of a agenda for how we're going to be able to approach our work in tandem with the data analysis that we're going to be doing. Now, when it comes to data, and this is where we're going to spend some energy today, and again, in your small groups and on your own over the next couple of weeks, but we know that to improve equity and access for our students, particularly for those students in special populations and non-traditional pathways, is that we know that data needs to be ready to disaggregate across demographics for special populations. And in meeting with Jessie shared with me, that she preaches this all the time, that the importance of disaggregating data, and that you all have in place some systems to help you begin to disaggregate data. But sometimes we need to, even take data a little bit further than that. So the next thing that we know when it comes to CTE data is that data has to be accessible for educators and administrators for disaggregated reporting. And again, I've worked with a lot of different institutions. You all have a pretty solid system that allows you to access that. I told Jessie it's not perfect. It's not exactly what I need for you to be able to do. But the next part, and this is what we'll be working on some training with today and moving forward, is that our goal is for you all as practitioners in the space is that you need to be equipped and trained to analyze the data in search of those equity gaps. Now, for that to happen, a couple of things have to take place. One, we have to overcome sometimes people have some pretty great fears about math, fears about spreadsheets, fears about data, and these could be even unconscious things for people of oh my God, I've downloaded a spreadsheet. Now I'm back in my 7th grade, math class, and my teacher's shaming me. And so you've got all of this triggering in your mind and all of your own sort of potential baggage around math and data. And so you've got to sort of challenge that and figure out, how do I really look at the data and find opportunities to ask the right questions to then begin to identify root causes. And so next, what we finally know is that data alone is not going to improve equity and access for students from populations. That data, as you all know, is absolutely the starting point for allowing us to have visibility into the student experience, and then we can begin to ask the right questions. And so while we are consistently working to improve data, we can begin to address the barriers that students face. And so really, that's really what the program that we're going to be embarking on does. So with data, what our goal is to begin to narrow down and think about and solve we can use a tree metaphor here, specifically looking at like non-traditional careers and pathways, is that our data helps us see symptoms like participation, performance, and persistence. And so then if we look a little deeper, we can begin to identify some problems, and some of the most common ones that we hear within this work is awareness or interest. If I had a nickel for every time somebody said, those girls just aren't interested, right? Well, folks, interest is not a root cause. It is a problem. It is a function of some deeper causes, such as bias and stereotypes, culture and climate, and policies and procedures. And so when we want to look to figure out how do we create and drive change, we're trying to get to an understanding of these things. And several of you have already mentioned some of the biases and stereotypes that exist, particularly within manufacturing. And so this root cause is really what we'll be spending a lot of time doing. It's that core issue, the highest level cause that sets in motion the entire cause and effect reaction that leads to the problem. And so some of the tools that we'll be using when it comes to root cause analysis is we will be looking at the 5 why, which is a root cause analysis template. I'll teach you how to do this in future workshops. We're going to learn process improvement methodologies, recognizing that systems are designed to get the results that we get. So if we wish to change outcomes for our students, if we wish to improve equity and access for special populations, we must change the system. And so this is, again, just a kind of teaser of what we're going to be doing moving forward. But before we dive into really looking at the data and talking about the data the next hour, there are a couple of concepts that are important for me to introduce to you. And so the first is positionality. So because understanding positionality is really important to this work. So positionality, it is the social and political context that creates your identity in terms of race, gender, class, sexuality, ability status, or any other intersection or any other identifiable characteristic of yourself. Positionality, it also describes how your identity influences and potentially biases your understanding of and outlook on the world. Now, positionality really came out of the qualitative research space. So as a qualitative researcher, you had to a best practice was to recognize your positionality in your work before you published it, right? So for example, my dissertation studied the experiences of girls in high school engineering. So my positionality as a woman who once was a girl in high school engineering was important in how I would then understand and process the data, because it would be impossible for me to erase my entire lived experience in order to so like my entire lived experience as a woman in engineering would be an embedded filter with how I saw their experiences. And so for you as a practitioner, positionality is also important because it's going to help you understand the way in which you understand the student experiences. Now, I'm going to share with you my positionality statement. And one of the tasks I've encouraged you to do this week is to do a deeper exercise in positionality, but we're going to do just a really short one here in a second. And so my positionality statement, this is something that is public on my website, and I'm going to read it to you here. So I am a single, white, educated, middle class, middle-aged, elder millennial, I feel the need to qualify that, queer woman, business owner, and a humanist who has multiple hidden disabilities. A middle child between 2 brothers. My white evangelical parents raised us in a deeply conservative, lower middle income Texas household. After 2 decades away, I recently relocated back to the small Republican stronghold town that grew me, Orange, Texas, to be closer to my parents. I'm a product of public schools. Academic scholarships and fellowships funded all 3 of my degrees, and my education has been a class equalizer for me in many ways. I'm working towards becoming an adoptive parent of teenage children from the Texas foster system. As a woman in computer science and engineering, I know what it feels like to be the only woman in the classroom, lab, fab, or conference room. My experiences drove me to focus my career on changing the culture and climate of engineering and tech so that people from marginalized or minoritized backgrounds feel valued, included, encouraged, and affirmed in the classroom and workplace. My work has since expanded to multiple industries and fields. I want to highlight a couple of things here that are important for me as I work within CTE. So as I have, continued working and supporting CTE over the last decade, one of the first things that I had to recognize early in the work is that I held deeply rooted cultural stereotypes about CTE based on my upbringing as a high achieving AP level student. Because in my experience as a student, those two things were treated as disparate. You are either a CTE student or you are an AP honors student. That was my lived experience. And what that revealed to me is that I held some biases around CTE that I had to address. It's also important, and when I think about my work within CTE, to recognize that I have lots of advanced degrees, and not all CTE pathways require lots of advanced degrees. So I have to be careful that my sort of academic elitism, that's a function of my education, doesn't manifest in how I interact with others, doesn't manifest in how I'm talking with educators. And so it's important for us to think about who we are, because it influences how we're looking at the data. It influences how we understand some of the cultures that we're serving. And so I'm going to provide a quick exercise. It's not quick, but this little part will be quick. Is I want you to reflect here for a second on your identity and how it affects how you move through and experience the world. Some things that you could think of, this list is not exhaustive, but you can think about your race. So certainly my experience growing up as a white woman affected how I move through the world differently than some of my friends who have a different skin color. The socioeconomic status that I was raised in has influences lots of ways that I function as an adult. My hidden disabilities affect how I operate, because most often people don't see my disabilities, right? When I think about my citizenship, if you haven't watched the movie The Swimmers, I think it's on Netflix. It's about a couple of Syrian refugees, and one of them goes on to become an Olympic athlete. Like, that will make you super grateful about your citizenship. Physical attributes, things thinking about, I have been both a skinny person and a fat person. So my experiences living in both size bodies affects how I understand and move through the world, whatever trauma that you've had. So I want you to spend a minute and think about, what are some elements of your identity and how might it affect how you are working in your job? So I'll try to play a little bit of classical music and set a timer for you to reflect on this. Let's come back together. One of the exercises I have for you this week is to go a lot deeper in reflecting on your positionality, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of space to think about it here in the moment. I want to introduce one more concept to you before we get ready for our break, and that is intersectionality. Now, this word has been captured by the zeitgeist, and it has largely been misconstrued and confused. And I'm here to clear it all up for you today. So intersectionality, and also on the platform, you'll have an opportunity if you come here on the network. I've got some additional resources on intersectionality, and including a really cute little 3-minute video that we're not going to watch today, but you can watch this. It involves like stop motion, so I encourage you to do that. But intersectionality, it is this interconnected nature of social categorizations that create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination and advantage. And so when we look at multiple identities, just like the boxes I had on the previous screen, there are all different kinds of identity that we can think about when we're looking at our data. And from the work that we're doing within CTE, it's not only important that we understand intersectionality, it's actually required within our Perkins data that we take an intersectional approach. And so what that means is that if we just disaggregated the data by males and females, which is how your data is labeled, if we just looked at it that way, then we wouldn't understand any of the nuance within the women's experiences around race and how that provides access to whatever kinds of pathways. So I'll give you an example. So the master's program that I was in at Texas Tech, it was a program funded by Texas Instruments. So they recruited women from Texas Women's University who were studying math or computer science, and then paid for our college, and we went on to get masters there. Now, what's interesting is that there were about a dozen of us, and of the 12 of us, there were 3 Black women that didn't finish the program. Now, these Black women went on to get PhDs and other things from other institutions. If they just looked at the data and said, hey, you know, we had 9 people finish, yay, that's one thing. But if they disaggregate by race and say 100% of the Black women didn't finish, that tells us that there was something that they needed. There were barriers that they were facing. There were supports that they needed within the West Texas community of Texas Tech that weren't being provided. And so intersectionality and disaggregated data is really important because it helps us understand the nuance of students' experiences, and it helps us realize who's being served and who's not being served. And so even though this program was targeted to, you know, create an opportunity for women, they didn't understand that the experiences of white women and Indian women were going to be different than the experiences of Black women within this part of the state. And so that's what we have to think about when we're looking at intersectionality, is that it helps us understand the nuance of experience. I'll give you one more example of this, and then we're going to go to break. So another example is an educator, and this is at a classroom level. So an educator in her classroom in Texas, she did an analysis working with an instructional coach. They did a heat map of looking at the kinds of engagements that she had with students throughout the day and throughout over a week's long time. Long story short, what they found is that the woman, a Hispanic woman herself, had 0 academic interactions with the 2 Hispanic girls in her class, meaning she would say hello to them, but she would never ask them questions or follow-up questions. And so the instructional coach did this heat map, and so it revealed this opportunity to learn, gave it to the teacher, and she's reflecting on it, and she thought, oh my gosh, why am I not calling on the young Hispanic girls? And then so she then was able to do some own personal analysis to reflect on her own internalized biases about Hispanic women in her class, and then she could have a greater awareness to recognize that. Interestingly enough, these students, they went on and followed them to other classes, and they experienced this in multiple classes. So until we disaggregate, in this case by ethnicity and race, to understand the students' experiences, these 2 students, these 2 young female Hispanic students, were going weeks at a time without teachers actually ever challenging them in an academic kind of way. And so whatever level, whether we're looking at an institutional level, whether we're looking at a classroom level or a program level, it's important for us to disaggregate by data, disaggregate by multiple identities, because then we know who's being served and who's not being served, and then what can we learn and what can we do about it. So let's take a 10-minute break. I'll set another timer on the screen. Maybe I'll try to play some music this time. I think we figured out if I mute, then that's where it goes away, which is a new feature. But we'll see you back in 10 minutes, and then we're going to start talking about the data.
Thanks, everyone.
I will put on the learning management system I guess it already is actually. So a reflective activity around positionality. So that's part of the request for you all to do moving forward this week. And I want to make sure that you're also thinking about why is an intersectional approach really important for your population and your goals. And so just want to make sure before we move on for this. Any questions on this before I fast forward and start looking at the data? We're talking about data. Any questions about positionality or intersectionality? As a quick sort of way of thinking about it, positionality is an understanding of self, and intersectionality is an understanding of systems and how it affects people. All right. On the learning management system, where's that screen at? Sorry to make you seasick here. Okay. I've created, and these popped up visible this morning. Because I didn't want you to think you had to do them before today. There is an activity here called Analyze Your Disaggregated Data for Gaps, and that's the one that has the plus or minus TBD, because it depends on what your data looks like. And so Jessie is also here with us today. I think, yeah, Jessie's still here with us. So she'll be able to answer any data questions. And I think that she's met with many of you already to ask some questions. But from what I understand of Jessie, she is super excited to help you understand and access data. So that's a pretty phenomenal resource that I've actually not run into many times before working with groups. So I hope that you take advantage of that. Now on this activity, I'm gonna show you a little bit of a demo to help you understand how I like to look at the data and how it helps me begin to ask some questions. But there's a tool here that you can access, and the first part is to understand what data that you have. And so thinking about whether you have participation, performance, completion, concentrator, and Jessie's mentioned that you have you don't often have participation data, if I understand her correctly. Are you talking to us? No. Okay. But participation data is really helpful when we're doing some of the analysis and exercises. And so these are some questions to kind of help you think about what is the data that you have. The suggested data format is going to be different than how you pull the data from your state system. And so admittedly, in order to get the data in the format that is in the demo that we're going to do at, it's going to take some savvy data pooling and organizing. And if you have a team of people that can help you, that's great. Ideally, we had systems that could put the data in systems, put the data in structures like this, but it's not what we have right now. But in order for us to understand what's happening with our students, it's important for the data to be in a way that we can look at it and understand it, right? So we need to be able to look at trends over time, and so that we can have visibility to the specific disparities that's, oh, you can't see my screen. You can't see my screen? Okay, all right, good. And so we want the data to be pulled so that each can be for each of the following things, so that you can see trends like the following: school year, gender, race, program. So for example, at school A in 2019, there were X Hispanic women in welding. Or you could have it pulled by school year, gender, and special pop in the program. Ideally, it's crossed with gender or race. In my experience, I have rarely seen data tables that allow us to look at gender, race, and special populations other than like non-trad. That's pretty rare, but if you're able to do that, then that's awesome. And so you want to be able to then manipulate the data in a way that can be analyzed. We're going to come back to this, and you can access this Google Sheet here in a minute. But this is what we're going to be using. It's a tool. You don't have to use this tool, but it's a tool that you can use for your equity gap analysis and your observations of the data. But first, I want to show you a little quick demo, and you can download this sample data pivot table from the LMS. So I'm going to come back here to the LMS, and you can go to this bullet here, watch disaggregated data analysis demo. We're going to watch part of it. We're not going to watch all of it now. And then here in this lesson, there's a sample data and pivot table. So you can download that if you want and kind of follow along with the video. But this is what I would encourage you to figure out. How do you get your data to look like this so that you can create some of the pivot tables that allow us to kind of see the trends that we're wanting to see? So if everybody can get that lined up, let me come back here, and we're just going to watch the first part of this video. So exploring our data is a really important part to understanding what's happening on our campuses or within our regions. So for this exercise, for this demonstration, I want to show you an example of some disaggregated data. Now, disaggregated data is data that has been broken down by detailed subcategories. So for example, this might mean marginalized group, gender, region, or level of education. Disaggregated data is so important because it can reveal deprivations and inequalities that may not be fully reflected in aggregated data. And so an analysis of disaggregated program data over multiple years is a critical first step in understanding the experiences of our students so that we can take action to close gaps and improve equity and access for every student. Now, ideally, you have data in the following suggested format. So whatever team that you're working with, each team needs 4 to 5 years of disaggregated data at the program level so that we have visibility of the disparities in performance measures such as participation, completion, and concentration. So the data pulled for each year, we want it to be laid out such that we can see trends like school, year, gender, race, program. For example, like at school A in 2009, there were X number of Hispanic women in welding. Like that's the level of detail that we want. If you can also access data by special population at the program level, this is fantastic. Ideally, this is also crossed with gender and race. But what's so important is that the data needs to be in a format that can be analyzed during the phase of our training. So this generally means that it requires significant data scrubbing to position the cells so that they can be configured in pivot tables or for a data team to create dashboards. So let's have a look at an example. So this is a data table from a sample data table. Now you can see here that there are many rows. So it goes on to thousands and thousands and thousands of rows. Now each row is a single person at a single stamp in time, so in a specific year. So in this spreadsheet, I've organized and I've added the zip codes, so this can help me sort out if program titles aren't consistent, which in this data set, that is the case. So I have the program data, I have the zip code to help me sort, I have the identification of gender and race, the year that the student participated, and again, this sheet contains multiple years of data. So you can see here that I have from 2015 to 2019 in data. What this sheet also has is it contains the participation, completion, and concentrator data. So for what we're going to look at the participation data when we look over at the pivot table here in a second. But it depends on how you want to examine the data that we encourage you to look at all of these different performance metrics. I also have 5 schools in this set of data, and so again, you may only have your one school, and then there's this final cell that each row is one student, and so you have to add a column with a 1 for each row for the pivot table calculation. So let's look, and again, you can see here that there are all kinds of programs that are listed in this. So let's look at the pivot table. I have gone ahead and sort of simplified this. Now, for schools, I have selected in this case all 5 of the schools. It's depending on your approach, you would probably not want to do this. But let's look at the filters here. You can see here how I've organized it. So I've set up a filter as a school. The columns are years. The value is the sum of the quantity. That's the ones, that there was a 1 in each row. And then for the rows, I've sorted it out by the data set, which is the performance measure. So you can see completion, concentrator, participation, the zip code, then by the program, and then by gender and race. So I've highlighted here one that we're going to look at. So we're going to look at zip code 150201. And this includes civil engineering or civil technology / technician. So if we close this, we see that over the course of time we had 58 students in 2015, and then it went down to 40 in 2017, and then made its way back up to 59 in 2019. But we want to disaggregate this a little bit more. So if we just looked at females and males, we can see that there were significantly less females than males in the program. So this is a non-traditional pathway for women. And then when we expand even further, we can see this disaggregation by race. So of the students who were participating, most of them were white. We had a spattering of students over time from who were multiracial, Hispanic, or Black. And so let's look at the same thing for the men. When we expand open the men, we see that most of the students are white, and then we've got a small percentage of students who are Black or African American, and the same for Hispanic and Latino. And we can see those trends over time. So when you look at this data, again, this is participation data for this particular program, we can ask questions like, what's happening? Why do we have 5 Black or African American men in 2015? And by 2018, we dropped down to 2, and now we're back to 4. So this gives you some things to start thinking about, asking questions, right? So we had 6 Hispanic or Latino men in 2019. Like, what happened between 2018 and 2019 that we saw such a significant increase? And then the same thing when we look at the female students here. So we had 4 in 2015. At some point we doubled that and got up to 8. What happened? What happened in 2016 that allowed us to see that increase? And now we're back down to 3. So this allows us the opportunity to understand that something's happening, and it gives us opportunities for where we can go ask questions. Okay. Again, we can look at practical nurse LPN training. We can see that there is a fairly steady. Go ahead and pause it here. Over the course of time from this is 2015. So this video is on the learning management system, so you can watch it and continue working through it. The next example I do is just for men in nursing, and so there was a question in the chat of like, are we going to be able to do this step by step in the training? And the short answer is there's no way that's possible. And so the second question is, are we going to do that step by step on our time with you? You can. I think that it would be really difficult, and you might be annoyed with me looking over your shoulder as you try to get this data organized. However, I am absolutely here to support you in this. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to recognize, like, okay, first step, I got to pull the data, right? And so you may need to ask for some help pulling that, and Jesse is offering to help you do that. And then the second step, which admittedly I think is the hardest, is to get it organized. And this is where it takes a little bit of sort of data visualization of like figuring out, sometimes you have to like flip tables, and meaning like if you've got something that's listed in columns and you need it in rows, then sometimes you Google different, Excel codes to help you do that. But what I hope is helpful to help you get started is to look at the sample spreadsheet I provided to you. And again, this is just a way of doing it. You could have other ways. I understand that sometimes you also contract with some people within your district to help you do this, so you may ask them to do it. And the data table that I have is enormous. So the original table, the original number of spreadsheets to make that one table, for example, was probably about 30 spreadsheets, just ballparking. So it took me 30 spreadsheets of different data to organize it and to create that one data table. And you may not need all of that, right? You may just need data for the engineering technology or the nursing for one school over, 4 years rather than 5 years and 10 schools. So don't be overwhelmed by the scope of that. It helps if you kind of start zeroing in on what it is that you kind of want to focus some of your energy. But the key is that we want to be able to have the data in a way that allows us to see each row is a student. We don't know who that student is, right? There's no identifying marker, but that's going to help us understand and count and see the trends over time. So again, if you want to schedule time with me, let's work on it. I think that you'll want to talk with your data team to help you kind of get everything ready for that. and you've got a few weeks to kind of work on this. And I want you to also, you know, recognize like this is a practice, this is a skill. So it is possible that I have a lot of training in Excel and lots of years of practice in Excel. And so that this shouldn't, so don't just hold a candle to me if you're like, no, Megan was going really fast in that demo and oh my gosh, I can't do that. Like, don't make me your benchmark because I've been doing spreadsheets for, you know, a long time. So Brooke asked, Jesse, is this slide deck in the LMS too? Oh, we can add that if that's okay. I can add that slide deck to the LMS. Okay.
Yep, you're more than welcome to add it. And this slide deck was emailed to everybody a couple weeks ago. And you still can schedule time with me, but I have office hours dedicated this Thursday. And then I think you all know that I do monthly trainings on this work as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so Jesse's going to be your best point of contact for like really specific questions on like how to pull data within your systems. I won't know how to do that, but I can help you, you know, learn to navigate how to put the data together. And again, the approach that I want you to take to this is like you're learning a new skill, maybe some of you, and this is going to help you really begin to build the skill over time. I would also recommend begin advocating for creating data structures that put the data in this format so that it's not so labor intensive moving forward. So sphere of influence, advocate, advocate, advocate. Okay, so what I want you to do now is we're gonna, I think what we'll need to do is, because I think some of you are here in teams and some of you aren't. So we're going to create just a set of breakout rooms, but we're not going to assign you to breakout rooms. So you can, so if Tom and Kristen, y'all are working together, drop in the chat and say, we're going to breakout room 3, and then y'all show up in that room to work together. But what I want you to do is to open up the learning management system, go to the activity here, the analyze your data, disaggregated data, and start working through this, recognizing that your data may not be ready, but understanding what data do you have, what data do you need to pull, and basically make your data game plan of how are you going to get it into this format, all right? So your task is to figure out how do I get my data in this format so I can begin to see trends. All right, so Casey, whenever you're ready, open the breakout rooms, but don't assign people. We'll just let them.
Okay. And how much time were you wanting to give?
What time is it? 2:27. Let's start with 10 minutes, and then I'm going to pop in the groups and check in as best I can.
Okay, perfect. Rooms are open. And everyone should have the option to join the room I assigned you or to pick a room.
Groups were random.
Awesome. Everyone, just a reminder that you have to choose what room you're going in and then enter that room. Thank you so much.
Engineering or civil technologies.
Megan, there's not any rooms that are open that Eric and I can go to speak about our data individually. Like everyone got pushed to joint rooms.
Okay, you can just stay here. Can you just stay in this room? I don't think we can add more rooms after they're open, can we, Casey?
No.
Nobody's meeting with their individual district teams right now. Everyone's combined.
So maybe we should close them and try.
Okay.
So why don't you create 8 rooms? I mean, create 20 rooms. Just
Okay.
don't assign everyone.
Okay. No problem. We're closing in 15 seconds.
This meeting is being recorded.
We're gonna try the room assignment again. We realized we could do that better. Hey, welcome back. We're gonna reset the breakout rooms.
Okay.
So this time we're gonna have just 20 empty rooms, and then you can join the room with your colleague.
So they are open. So you should be able to choose your room with your colleague. Thanks everyone for your patience.
Are they open?
Oh, are they? There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry. There we are.
So use the chat or the mic to say, to tell your group mates how to meet you where you're going, or just jump in one. Welcome back.
Lovely. Here we go. Perfect. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. All right, so I am certain that you are still thinking about all the things that you were talking about. Let's see, my camera froze. And so our goal is that today we'll have started the conversation, and you've got plenty of opportunity and challenge ahead of you to get that data analyzed. Now, remember, you're not being graded, right? Like, you don't need to get your data in a spreadsheet so that Megan says thumbs up that looks just like mine. That's not the goal. The goal is that you figure out how to access the data, that you can see trends over time at the program level that has multiple, at a minimum, 2 intersections of identity. Gender and race is a great place to start. Or students with disabilities and gender is a great place to start. So the key goal is that you're learning to look at data trends over time at the program level, intersected by at least 2 identities. That's your goal. And so if your preference is to use your state data system and pull basically 1 data point at a time, you can do that. For me, that sounds terrible, but that's my preference. You might think that's the easier beast to wrangle, and so do what makes you happy, right? It also might be a function of, privileges for data and things like that. So what I'll do on the learning management system is I'll put up some of my recommended steps and key reminders, like I've just shared with you here today, is that the goal of this, again, is see trends over time at the program and student level. What you may run against is sometimes they want to, oh my God, the word just escaped. What is it called when they won't give you anything less than 10? What is it called?
Redacted.
Yeah, there's another word too, but that one works too. Is like, thank you. Is that because of FERPA rules, it won't let you pull that data. But that, when we're talking about what we're talking about, it's not useful, because most often the numbers are less than 10 or 5 or whatever that magic number is for your state. So you really need to figure out, how do I have access to this? Now, I want you to also think about, you're trying to systematize this process for your job. So take notes along the way of how you're doing this, because you'll want to be able to replicate this moving forward. Who are you asking? Who's helping you? How are you putting the spreadsheets together? When I know when I did that sample data table years ago, I had to do it for like 15 different schools in community colleges in South Carolina. So I wrote a script, right? Not an actual script, like a not a technical script. That would have been awesome. But I just wrote like a do this, and it helped me so I could easily get everything organized and repeated. So think about how do you create some sort of standard operating procedures around this data access and pulling so that next time it's not as hard to think it through. Questions?
I have a question for Jesse. Is Wise Dash set up so that we would be able to actually get what was suggested, what Megan suggested with, school gender race program, like, once we get it into Excel, like for example, Al and I put the attending school in the column, and then our rows are like gender, race, IAC title, and CTE graduate. And obviously it's a big mess on the screen. But can we actually use that and then actually get student level data where we don't know the student, but we have rows of students that would be like 3,000 of them or something? Can we
Yes.
actually do that?
Yes, you actually can do that. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So are you going to work from Wise Dash, Eric, or are you going to create an Excel spreadsheet?
Well, I think we have to, I would not have to, but I'd rather create an Excel spreadsheet, I think. Yeah.
That's fine. Yep. Yep. You
Which
can do that.
Where is the download on this to get it into a spreadsheet from here?
In Wise Dash or Megan's example file?
In Wise Dash.
It's this is where I have to go into a whole demonstration. So you click on your group, you bring your cross tab up, and it creates chunks or groups of students. So anything that's underlined, you can click into, and it will give you a group. And then on the far right hand corner, it will have that download. I don't know what it looks like. It looks like that. That download symbol, which says send, even though you're not sending it, you're just downloading it into an Excel document.
But we can't so what's on our snapshot screen, we won't be able to just download the entire thing we have. In other words, just all the stuff I mentioned.
Yeah, so there's a little flaw in this system, and I'm trying to maneuver through it, and it's race and gender. You have to organize them into separate categories and then key them in or copy and paste. And I realize that's irritating, and I've made comments, but I might have to have some backup support on that. So Eric, you and I might just have to work together, and I would tell you, like I said before, pick one of your schools to do this for, not your 3,000 concentrators, because that's massive. Like, I do this level data work for the entire state for 376 districts. It takes me days to create this report. So let's start simple. Pick one of your schools to learn the skill before you expand it to, you have what, 40 different schools. Does that make sense?
Right. I don't know how to get just down to one school, but we'll have to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, yep. If you just email me, I'll help you get that. Yep. And those of you that were not in my last breakout room, yes, I will go into detail of demoing this to anyone that wants to hop on the call. My office hours Thursday from 2 to 3:45. But if you can't, because I understand most of your teaching, just email me and we'll go through it, okay?
Okay, so I would like to invite everyone to take a big deep breath and let out all anxiety when it comes to data and spreadsheets. We are going to be able to do this and learn. Don't hesitate to ask questions, and we will build on this data moving forward. Now, again, your first step is to get the data pulled and to try to get it in the shape that you want it. When you're ready to start analyzing, that's where this spreadsheet, the equity gap analysis spreadsheet, can be useful to you. So it's just a way of looking at data. So for example, here I wrote this, the data source is a custom pivot table. I'm looking at engineering. I'm looking at completer data. I'm looking at women. I can select either I'm looking at all races or I'm looking at, Black or African American students. If you have special populations, you can select that. Oh, it looks like I need to add another option. look at your time period and your observations. The numbers remain low over 4 years at 2, 3, 2, 1. I made this up. Disproportionate to number of women in CTE and very disproportionate to women at the school. So that reminds me to tell you that it's also really important, and when you look at these numbers, to look at them in relation to the school's numbers, demographic numbers, and to your community numbers. So if you say, for example, your school is in a predominantly Hispanic community, but yet the numbers within the CTE don't reflect that population, and the numbers within your program don't reflect that population, that's something to pay attention to. So you've got to have that comparison data to not only who's attending your school, but who lives in the community. So that's where you're going to benchmark and baseline against as best you can. And so this is just a tool for taking notes. How you use it is you're going to go to file, make a copy, because you only have view access. So just make a copy of it and use it. You can download it into Excel, or you can, here's the Excel right here. You can just access it that way as well. All right, so moving forward, we're here at the end of our time today. Every week on Monday, some point during the day, I'll drop some activities here. If I'm having enough conversations or thoughts with people that are telling me you need something else, I'll add another lesson, and then it'll notify you that says, hey, there's another tool, another lesson added. You may see some notifications about communications and questions. Make sure that you set your settings around notifications in a way that works for you. So we don't want this to become like, stop talking to us, Megan, right? Like, just set it how it's going to make your workflow best. And again, reach out to me. You've got all my contact information here. If you've got feedback, you can share your feedback also here, or just message me. And then finally, if you have time, or at the end of the time, but I always want people to reflect on what you've learned. So as you're sort of moving on in your day, think about, what are 3 things that you learned today? What are 2 things that you would like to do differently? And then what's your 1 immediate action item? And with that, I am so excited to start this journey with you all for the next few months. I hope that you build some trust with me and allow me to help you in your journey in this. And when I say I'm open to feedback, I really am. And this is your learning opportunity. So I can't read your minds. Let me know what you need and how we can customize this to best serve your goals and objectives. And with that, thank you, and we'll see you on the platform.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, y'all.